I've been covering North Carolina politics for 40 years, and I was really, when I started out as a rookie many years ago, I really wanted to read a book that sort of explained it all to me in terms of how the state got to where it was, why the state elects both Democrats and Republicans, who was connected to who, what are the political machines that dominated the state, not just in the last few years, but through the decades. And I wanted to connect things. And I went looking for such a book, and there was no such book. So I decided that I have an interest in history and so forth. And so I decided to write that book, so not only for my edification, and so I will be learning a process, but so for other people that came along. Now, and it's written, it's not only for, of course, the scholar, but also for the layman, for the person who's engaged, who wants to know about North Carolina. Not only for the new people coming into the state, and North Carolina is one of the fastest growing states, so we have people coming in North Carolina from all over the country, but also for the people who have lived in North Carolina all their lives, who may know a little bit about the state's political history, but want to know a little bit more. Well, a lot of people have asked why I named the book The Paradox of Tar Heel Politics, and the reason it's a paradox is a lot of people really don't understand North Carolina politics. How is it that a state can elect both conservatives like Jesse Helms, which is probably the most famous politician the state has produced in recent years, except for maybe John Edwards, and how it can also at the same time produce progressive politicians like Jim Hunt, who was a four-term governor, or Terry Sanford, who was a governor and a United States senator, or if you want to go back in time a little bit, Frank Porter Graham, who was one of the leading liberals in the South. So how can the same group of voters produce both conservatives and liberals? And so that is a paradox, that the state has both liberal tendencies, it has major progressive universities, it has progressive areas like the Research Triangle, and yet it has very conservative tendencies too. There's vast parts of the state that are very conservative. And so it has, it confounds people who live outside of North Carolina, look at North Carolina and say, really, what is it, a red state? Is it a blue state? It tends to go, for example, Republican in presidential races, and yet we just, until November, we had just had 20 straight years of Democratic governors. So that's the paradox. The state is really, if you look at it ideologically, it's pretty much middle America. One of the interesting things that the Gallup poll organization does is they poll each state in the country. And so Mississippi is about the most conservative state in the country, Hawaii and New York are among the most liberal, and North Carolina falls right in the middle. And so because it falls right in the middle, it doesn't take much to push it. It's not to push it into either one column, Democratic column, or the Republican column. And so it goes back and forth very easily. So the slightest national win will push it in the Democratic column. The slightest Republican win will push it in the Republican column. So in 2008, for example, it went slightly. It was the closest state that Barack Obama won. In 2012, it was the closest state that Mitt Romney won. Now, what happened in 2010 was the Republicans won control of the state legislature, and that was a very critical election because that came just as redistricting occurred, and redistricting gave Republicans real advantages because they could draw new lines that made it more favorable to win both the state legislature and Congress. And so that has given the Republicans a leg up in the next election, 2012. So right now, Republicans, for the first time since Reconstruction, have control of the entire state government, all three branches of state government. But that's very unusual because we've just gone through a period of 20 years of Democratic control of the governorship, which is not only the only southern state that's occurred, but it's the only state east of the Rockies that's occurred. The only states that went through 20 years of Democratic governors were the states of Washington and the states of Oregon. So the state goes back and forth because it's so evenly balanced. It's not a red state, it's not a blue state, really it's a purple state. From the Democratic point of view, somebody like Terry Sanford, who was elected governor in 1960, and then he was later president of Duke University, and then he was elected to the United States Senate in 1986. He was very important because he was governor of North Carolina during the period of desegregation, and which was obviously a critical time in the South. So he was guiding the state on a very moderate course, and setting that course during the time when George Wallace in Alabama was standing at the courthouse gate. And at that time, Sanford was pushing the state in a very moderate way toward racial integration. So he was setting the mold, and that sort of opened up the state for things like the Research Triangle Park and so forth. It made it business friendly. It set the mold for the state as different from the Deep South state. So I think he was a very critical, because that helped set the reputation for the state as a moderate, progressive southern state that was different from the rest of the South. On the other hand of the side, Senator Jesse Helms, I think, was very important, because he was not only important in terms of helping build the Republican Party in North Carolina, helping switch a lot of conservative Democrats to the Republican Party and help build the Republican Party, which is a very powerful party in the state now. But he was also a national figure in helping build the whole, what they came to be known as the New Right, and help Ronald Reagan get elected president. Reagan's presidency was very much in doubt until Helms' organization saved his political career in the 1976 primary here in North Carolina. And many of the Republicans now control the state legislature think that view Jesse Helms as sort of the role model. So Helms was very much a critical figure. So those are two figures that I think are very, very important for different reasons to the state's political history. Robert Reynolds was a populist senator who was elected during the Great Depression. He was actually a wealthy man from the Asheville up in the mountains. He was a Democrat. He was a bit of a buffoon and a vaudeville type character who portrayed himself as a poor man. He was a great traveler, and we all assume that, for example, travel widens and broadens someone, right? Makes someone more cosmopolitan, but that's not always true. And he actually got, as he traveled a lot, it actually narrowed him, and he became very anti-immigrant and so forth. But one of the things he did was, when he was traveling during the Depression, and after he was elected United States Senate, he visited Nazi Germany and Mussolini's Italy. And he saw that Germany and Italy, their economies were booming while the United States was still mired in the Great Depression. And of course, one of the reasons they were doing that was they were rearming. That's so because they were about to go to war. And he became very, very impressed with Hitler and Mussolini. And he began going back home and talking up Hitler and Mussolini. And eventually that led to his downfall, because there was, among the southern states and southern Democrats, there was very little isolationist sentiment. The isolationist sentiment in this country was mainly among Midwestern Republicans, but among southern Democrats, they tended to be Anglophiles, and there was very strong support for England. And that eventually they forced him to, the Democratic Party forced him to retire, because they put up with a lot of his shenanigans, but they could not put up with his pro-Nazi sentiment. People can see what they want in Sam Irvin. Sam Irvin was a World War I hero. He was a very bright guy. He was conservative in a lot of ways, and he was one of the staunch defenders of segregation, which you sort of had to be if you were a Southern senator in that period. He was one of the leading strategists. But that's not how he's remembered today. He's remembered today mainly, of course, through Watergate, because he led the Watergate hearings and that helped bring down Nixon. And being a conservative Democrat gave him, I think, more moral authority among Republicans to lead that investigation, because he saw that as an assault on the Constitution. He wasn't some northern liberal that was going after Nixon. He was a Southern Democrat. And he also stood up to Joe McCarthy, who was leading the witch hunt. And he was able to do this in part because he spent most of his life as a judge. Everyone was afraid of Joe McCarthy, because McCarthy could smear anybody by saying if you attacked him, he would say you were working for the communists, or you were tied in with the communists, or whatever, or you were a tool of the communists. Well, no one wanted to stand up to McCarthy, or hardly anybody did. And so when Irvin went up to Washington, he was this freshman, and they said, well, who's going to stand? He was on the committee that was dealing with these issues. And he said, well, I'll stand up to him, because he didn't know any better, and he was fearless. And he did stand up to him. He was a freshman. And McCarthy and McCarthy went after Irvin, and Irvin went right on national TV and went right after McCarthy. And he made his reputation immediately as somebody who knew no fear. The major takeaway is that North Carolina is a little bit different from the rest of the South. It has both progressive impulses and conservative impulses. I don't think you can stereotype the state. Some elections it can go progressive and some conservative. It is different from much of the rest of the South. The moment you think you understand it, you're going to be surprised.